There's also a breaking story which is coming out of the West Australian tonight, which is a perfect example of when you get too close to China, how things start to work, okay? Now, there is a museum in Western Australia that had an exhibit into coronavirus, and allegedly the consul-general representing China reached out to the West Australian Museum and told them to change factual errors in the display. The apparent factual error was that the pandemic started in China. And guess what happened? The museum buckled and changed the reference, omitting the references to China, instead making references to it spreading around the globe. Now, Stephen, it might be a plaque that very few people will read in a museum that some people will go to. But what does it say when the Chinese diplomat, on the behalf of the Chinese government, reaches out to the Australian publicly funded museum, and the Australian publicly funded museum changes the truth?
Yeah, no, look, when the Chinese are trying to whitewash their involvement in the coronavirus, then that's when people have got to stand up. I mean, we've got an investigation that's severely hampered while it was a worthy thing that we called for. The WHO has, you know, there are a set of ground rules that aren't allowing people to get the sort of access that they truly need. And for the Chinese to keep pretending that it didn't originate in China is just a whitewash, and they should be called out on it. And an Australian museum should not buckle to that sort of pressure, not in Western Australia and not anywhere else. It's no different to when they tried to, or they succeeded in forcing the Melbourne City Council not to proceed with a resolution around, I think it was the Tiananmen Square issue. I mean, this is wrong when they seek to exert their view of the world into Australia's debates. It is not acceptable behaviour by them.
Well, it gets even worse. I don't know if we've got the actual quote, if we can whack it up on screen, but if we can, it says here that, the museum was contacted by the acting consul-general in Perth about factual errors, and we were pleased to advise the mistakes were immediately rectified. The boss of the museum, Alec Coles, the CEO of the WA Museum, says, quote, "The museum strives for authenticity and accuracy in all of its work, and where mistakes are made, we will correct them." What is the mistake, James? What is the mistake?
The mistake they made is not going harder and pointing out the fact that China not only was the origin of the coronavirus, but that they let it spread throughout the world.
Correct.
That is
the domestic flights.
The domestic
stopped,
flights.
International flights.
And they had thousands and thousands of people go around the world and spread this thing around the world. This has been happening for years, Paul. It's happened at universities. University of Sydney, 2013, they said, oh, we're not going to let the Dalai Lama on campus because the consulate didn't like it. We've seen museums do this same sort of thing. We've seen all sorts of discussion groups banned. We've seen everything that's happened with Drew Pavlou up at the University of Queensland.
Airlines that will change their maps.
Airlines change their maps. So these are private companies, publicly funded institutions. We have got to stop being so reliant on China. The universities should be looking to other markets. Why don't they take American students? Push for that market, you know? Do something else. We cannot be so reliant on China. It's going to be years of pain to decouple from them, but we and the rest of the world are going to have to do this because ultimately I think China is in a weak position. This regime is in a weak position fundamentally if enough of the world says, no, you know what, we are sick of this. Stop it, we're done.
You'd be pleased to know, Pauline, the timeline on this, by the way, again, according to the West Australian, they're reporting tonight. Complaint made on Friday, changed by Monday, and the Consul-General is, quote, happy with the response that they received.
Well, Paul, I think it's pathetic the way they haven't sort of stood up for what they believe in Australia, and they cave in. They really do cave in. That's the problem with it, that people don't stand up to them and have their say. You know, James is completely right in what he says about all this, that we have to take a strong stance with this, and I've said this for many years, many years. I've always, you know, been outspoken that we've got to stand up for our own country and who we are. We can't kowtow to anyone else. You have to work because we're global, we must work with other countries. I know that. People said, oh, I wanted to put a wall around Australia. That was a load of rubbish. That wasn't the case at all. I'm very strong on who we are as a nation, as a people, to be self-sufficient, self-reliant. I've always pushed that. And I said, unless we did, and I said years ago, we lose our industries and manufacturing, we're going to have nothing. We're going to leave it ourselves at the behest of other nations to control us and tell us what to do, and sanctions will be put on us. And this is exactly what's happened. This COVID has made us open up our eyes. That's why the government now is pushing about the Foreign Investment Review Board, about this, the states and the local governments and territories, about what agreements they put in place with the universities, all the rest of it. And so they should be overwatching this, and the agreements are done. So I've got no problem with it, but it is a concern to a lot of Australians. But I can see the government and I'm glad to hear that Labor are now supporting in bipartisan to actually take these steps towards taking back control of our own country and not allowing China to dictate to us the terms or threaten us.